right, everybody. So a lot of throughout film history, we have a lot of team-ups. We have like John Wayne and John Ford. They did a lot of movies together.
Oh, yeah.
We have Robert De Niro, Martin Scorsese, who did a lot of...
And then Leo and Scorsese, and now Leo De Niro and Scorsese.
Right, you could do that comparison. But the one that I think is most productive would be J. Lee Thompson and Charles Bronson. They did like 8 movies
When
together.
you say productive, you just mean quantity. You don't mean quality, right?
Which they will obviously adore. Yes, we produce productive quantity.
Yeah.
And today we're talking about one that kind of a cult classic now is really heavily trashed when it came out and premiered in 1983. We're going to talk about Charles Bronson and J. Lee Thompson's film 10 to Midnight.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hi, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you once again for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show Twitter and on Instagram. Yes, we do have a Patreon. Check that out for some great deals and some great content and an opportunity to tell us what movies we can review in the future.
Yeah.
Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics' reviews as well as ours. And please do us a solid by hitting a like button or subscribe for further content. So today we're talking about one of our first, I think it's the first movie with Charles Bronson. Well, it's the second one.
After House of Wax.
Second one, actually. House of Wax was the first. Charles Bronson's
10 to Midnight. Detective Leo Kessler has been partnered with rookie cop Paul McCann to hunt a serial killer who slays women that have spurned him. Oh yeah, he's also naked when he slays. Now Kessler and McCann are racing against the clock to find the killer who's acquired a new target, Leo's daughter.
Charles Bronson isn't afraid to attach to certain directors to do multiple movies.
Mm-hmm.
He did a bunch with Michael Winner, of course, Death Wish 2.
Oh, that's right.
Sergio Leone, a lot of westerns with him.
Mm.
John Sturges and Charles Bronson and Tom Grease. He did 3 films with him. But it wasn't until 1976, I think it was St. Ives came out in 1976, that he kind of comes together with J. Lee Thompson and Charles Bronson come together. And that exchange kind of went okay. The movie kind of didn't really pan out because it wasn't the action-airy film that they kind of wanted to see with 2 of them. But with that mutual friendship, they became the ball kind of rolling and continue to make movies afterwards.
Yeah. And if you know these 2 guys, if you've seen any footage of them just talking separately, they seem like a very unusual pairing, if you will. J. Lee Thompson is not really the type of person you would assume would be directing a lot of these kinds of films. And when you see Charles Bronson, you don't exactly assume that he would work well with Thompson either. So it's kind of this strange bedfellows of it all. Yeah,
and I think there was not a lot of other people talking about how those 2 work together. There wasn't a lot of time of communicating. They just kind of know we do this, and we go. So it wasn't a lot of like exchange. They're just almost like they knew each other were going to say beforehand, which keeps the ball rolling. So 10 to Midnight came out in 1983, and it was one of those, I think it was one of the, Roger Ebert hated it. He called it garbage.
Well, this is the funny thing. So I've been watching a ton of Siskel and Ebert episodes, just having it on in the background while I'm doing stuff around the house. And what's crazy to me is the amount of time I've noticed that Ebert will hate a film like this, and then Siskel will actually kind of give it a bit of a lift, because if you guys didn't know, Gene Siskel was a bit of a hornball when it comes to these movies.
Right.
If there was a bunch of nudity, he tended to give it a little bit more of a lift while also denigrating the genre. So it was very confusing to see a film like this come out, and you wonder, is Siskel going to like it for the nudity or dislike it for the violence?
I love that perspective. So it came out in 83 during the heightened era of slasher films.
Yeah.
I've tried to find somewhere that I think the script initially was supposed to be a horror movie, because previously he did Happy Birthday to Me, which was a grade A slasher film.
Yeah.
And then this comes along, and they changed it. It was supposed to be Bloody Sunday, and they changed it to this weird, the producers wanted 10 to Midnight, and it doesn't really make it. We try to find the reason for it.
Yeah, 10 to Midnight is an absolutely worthless title. If you try to, I mean, the only thing about it that even like somewhat connects with it is the really odd poster. And the poster is up behind us, you can check out here. But there's the villain of the film doing clock hands in front of a giant. This poster is like a Ghana poster. Have you ever seen the Ghana posters for films? Yeah. Where they're like, none of the elements are actually in the film in the way that they're depicted on the poster. And like, there's no point where the villain does clock hands or anything.
Italian horror movies use those posters.
Yeah.
It's almost like clickbait. It makes no sense.
Exactly. So that's kind of the weird thing about it is the title maybe only has a connection with the poster that really doesn't connect with the film all that much either. So it's beyond me.
So Charles Bronson's hunting a bad guy played by, what's his name? You got
Gene Davis, not Gina Davis.
Gene Davis, who does this very pre-American Psycho. It's very if you have seen American Psycho, Christian Bale, but he's almost like the springboard of the American Psycho Christian Bale that we would see.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure if the nude scene in American Psycho was in the book or not, because I haven't read the book by Bret Easton Ellis. But what's so peculiar to me is, it's kind of like they took that scene and just said, make a movie. We'll go back in time and do it beforehand.
Yeah.
It's a very peculiar killer trademark, and you're right when you talk about how it kind of had that slasher element. I'm sure, because I know J. Lee Thompson, I think, had a story credit for the film, but not a screenplay credit. So maybe he was the guy who came up with the idea of combining My Buddy Charles with a slasher film, and what can we do about that? And then, of course, you get William Roberts, who had done The Magnificent Seven.
Yes.
He later did The Legend of the Lone Ranger, a very critically panned version of that character.
We'll skip over that.
But then he did this one, so you kind of have those elements of, I'm sure that William Roberts was the guy hired to just jam those two ideas together.
Yeah, it starts very weird also. All of a sudden he just at the typewriter and he says, I'm a son of a gun and I'm a bad guy. It's like, and then the movie starts. It's like, okay.
I don't think Murder, She Wrote had started yet, but I believe that this might have been some sort of like weird way of Murder, She Wrote in this situation, because when it shows up, I wasn't sure if he was a cop. I wasn't sure if he was going to be the criminal. I wasn't sure what he was doing at this
right, if you go blindly into this, right. So, and of course, Charles Bronson's hunting people, but he has a partner, Andrew Stevens, we recognize from The Fury. He actually had a very celebratory, he was like a teen bopper from the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
This is one of his almost last films he would do. He would go on to stop making movies and become an agent for other actors. But this is one of the last, it's kind of weird because he's so young, he's playing a young person. This is one of the last movies he would do.
Yeah.
And playing this fresh out of water, fresh kid, doesn't awkward, and of course you have one of the most interesting introductions of both those characters in the movie. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to remind me, like, forget Andrew Stevens was a big star around this time that people kind of don't really know about now.
Yeah, because I think he was also in Shampoo as well, and so and he's got hair for the movie Shampoo, if you will. Yes. But he's very much that kind of like young, kind of hot new thing that you would place with someone like a Charles Bronson, who was at the time, I think, in his 60s, and he actually got plastic surgery to look a little younger so that he could have a daughter that would be Lisa Albacher's age. And so he actually got some plastic surgery to look younger, but there's only so much you can do. You can't reset the clock. So putting him with a younger thing is going to maybe get some of those other people into the theater. That's kind of the brilliance of doing the buddy cop film, is you get someone who's notable in the first, and then you get someone who's hot and young in the second, and you get them together.
The other enticement to see this movie in 1983 is this came out after Death Wish Part 2, and a lot of people had a misnomer before this movie came out that this was kind of secretly Death Wish 3. And kind of rumors around that this was, the title is different but the same perspective. I would venture this almost could be, if you slap Death Wish 3 on it, people are like, oh yeah.
You'd have to rework the kind of background of his character, if you will.
Yeah.
But you could do it. I'd always wondered, unfortunately, that's kind of the thing about Charles Bronson. He's an actor very much like John Wayne, where it's not so much the performance that he gives is subtle and nuanced, it's the director that knows what, and the casting agent that knows where to put them.
Yeah.
I've always said, I don't think John Wayne was a good or bad actor. John Wayne was John Wayne. That was the character he was playing.
He knew how to do the brand. And Charles Bronson's doing this. He knows how to do the brand.
Yeah, so it's just a question of whether or not J. Lee Thompson can do what John Ford did and place him in the right roles. That's always the question about it. So in many ways, every Death Wish movie and every not Death Wish movie was a Death Wish movie. They were all the same because it was Charles Bronson as himself.
And you got to remember, this is 83 with Charles Bronson. He's in his early 60s, and he still's got like 20 more of these kind of movies left to go.
Yeah, because you said this was after Death Wish 2.
Yeah.
And as we've stood by, there's 3, 4, and 5. So there are at least 3 more on the way. He's not even halfway through his Death Wish.
And they would go on to make him and J. Lee Thompson would go on to make 5 more other movies, 6 more other movies.
Yeah, we really missed the boat actually for getting a chance to see Charles Bronson in an ape suit for one of the Planet of the Apes sequels. Right. Unfortunately, their time together didn't allot those two things together. But man, it would have been great.
It was great. Yeah. So, without stealing my review, this is totally a Charles Bronson film. You had to know what you're getting into. Mm-hmm. This is not just a movie. This is a Charles Bronson movie. He's the title card.
Well, and that goes back to one of the benefits. I mean, the benefit of Charles Bronson movies being all the same is you know what you're getting. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of, you know, I haven't seen a lot of his films, but I know when I see one, I'm like, this is the template. This is what we're working with. And so that kind of like, especially for some of the broader strokes of this film that it takes, that does kind of help soften your expectation on it.
Yeah. So, up next is our review of 10 to Midnight. If you're like the slasher movies of the early 80s, I don't think this will be in the category of slasher movies, but I think you should be interested to see this movie and see if you would put this in the category of slasher movies. Do you kind of agree with that kind of perspective?
Going back to it, I mean, of course, we have Peeping Tom, and we have Psycho, and we have Black Christmas, all these films that kind of gave us the inkling of what slashers would be. 1978, we get Halloween, which is where it becomes mainstream. And then you get films over the next 2 years that basically rip off Halloween, to the point where even Roger Ebert said Halloween 2 was a rip-off of the rip-off of Halloween. So you've got that whole time period, and we've covered a lot of these before, the Burning,
small
the Prowler.
little window. It's like 78 to like 82.
Well, by the time 83 to 84 happened, the slashers had died off except for the big cannons, the big guys that could maintain through the rest of the decade, I guess, if you will. And so this is definitely one where it's a smart idea to take another genre and mold it into a slasher, because then you're at least coming at it from a different angle. Because so many of these films, The Prowler, The Burning, they all kind of had that similar idea.
It's an interesting concept that this to work. The bad guy works his alibi by going to movies and sneaking out of the bathroom.
Yeah,
and then sneaking back in. But then you have Charles Bronson being a bad guy by planting evidence against him.
Yeah, it's one of those elements that really hasn't aged well when you look at the current state of policing in America. When you kind of compare that kind of issue, it's one of those things that really ages
because
poorly.
In the movie it goes, forget what's legal, do what's right. Well,
sometimes they're the same. But I kept thinking about that as well watching it, is because, you know, this is a movie of its time period, and I think a lot of people, when we're shepherding in fear of you can't trust your neighbor, you can't trust the people around you, you can't trust the other, we look to people to be our saviors who are going to break the rules in order to get that. And I think that's something that unfortunately doesn't age with this film very well, because I didn't buy that Charles Bronson knew that this guy was the killer. I didn't buy that he had enough evidence to say this guy was the killer.
I'll get to a little bit with my review. That's kind of a weak point.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the strengths, because I think this works with the murder scenes and all that. The horror parts, kind of effective.
The thing about it that I have a problem with is that it's such a, again, of the times in terms of its even slasherness, where we have this nude killer, and the nudity of the killer is a gimmick. Yeah. But it's a gimmick that they never really go with. And I'm going to be the guy who says it. There's a lot of naked women in this movie, and yet we got to cover up the dong. It's really kind of hampered around where, like, the nudity of the film, I'm all for whatever you want to put on your screen, but it can't sacrifice the story. And there's a number of times in the editing of this film that frustrated me, where it's like, we have, especially during that last massacre sequence, if you will, we kept cutting to the woman in the shower, and I don't think she had anything to do with the plot in any way, shape, or form, but we're losing the excitement of the film because we keep cutting to this naked woman in the shower. And I get it, she's gorgeous, but, like, why?
80s.
80s, yeah.
That's why I kind of love it.
But that's the problem, is it slows down and it actually loses steam every time it does it. And it does it a number of times throughout the film, where the film is gaining steam, and then we have one of these kind of schlocky nude scenes that, again, sacrifice what's going in the story. If you want to have every character in your film be nude, hey, it's going to be a wild party. But, like, it can't sacrifice the story or the tension, and a lot of times the editing in this film does. And it's funny because it's edited by J. Lee Thompson's son.
First time
Peter Lee Thompson, who went on to do The Exorcist 3, which is a movie I think is very well edited, and I love that movie. So it's definitely not a case of him being a bad editor, but maybe working with not so great footage.
Here's my perspective, because I was raised in the 80s. It's so 80s, and I kind of get a charm at watching it. We need a woman in the shower scene. Doesn't really fit, but my God, we're 1983, got to do it.
Yeah, but what you have earlier on in the film is you've got the one woman who gets down into kind of that negligee, the white one, and she's walking around her apartment, and he's stalking her from inside the apartment. I thought that sequence was kind of that, like, that grindhousey, you know, she's naked for no particular reason scene that worked really well with the over-the-topness that we're going for. And especially because he's in there and he's nude and he's lurking and he's got two things for stabbing. Like, it's a really disturbing sequence. early on in the film. But then you get scenes near the end where it's like, why are we doing this? You know, like, why are we... It just feels to me like this movie needed the ability to just show this guy full frontally nude, and that would have been the gimmick for the film. Because they're kind of hiding it. They're like, well, he's naked, but he's not really naked.
They don't explain his motivations, why he feels he needs to be naked when he does these murders.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really explain it very well. But
well, it's kind of like they have two different explanations. And one of them I thought worked kind of well. In the schlock sense. The schlocky idea of he doesn't get blood on his clothes if he's not wearing clothes.
Right.
You know, and that's why the planted evidence he knows is planted. That's why he knows he won't get caught in that way.
Because he's naked.
That's, I think, stupid but interesting.
Right.
Whereas the other one is that he's been spurned by these women around him, and so his thing is to be naked to stab them because he couldn't, you know, metaphorically stab them the other way. It's like that idea just like... They're two ideas that had they been the main cause of his reasoning for nudity, it would have made sense, but they're both jammed together. They kind of don't make sense.
And it's very clear he's very misogynistic. He is an involuntary celibate. We call incels now.
Yeah, this is a movie that I see more of now than I do, you know?
We didn't have a word for that back then. But he's very misogynistic, involuntary celibate, but he's probably impotent. Mm-hmm. He's frustrated, but then you have this driving force of what? Mm-hmm. Other than you're not like Zodiac Killer where you need an audience. You're not telling people their crimes. There's really nothing behind you other than I have to do it.
Yeah.
But every psychopath has a reasoning. I mean, even the Joker has a reasoning. I would like a little more definition of why he needs to do this.
Yeah, because they hint at a lot, and I think, again, looking at it through today's lens, we see why he's doing it. Like, we get it a little bit more.
Other than at the end, it's almost like I feel like I can get away with it because I'm mentally ill.
I can hang it on that, yeah. Because who is it? Jeffrey Lewis, who plays his.
If you haven't seen the ending.
Oh yeah, Jeffrey Lewis, who plays his lawyer, is the guy who's like, well, we'll plead insanity if we have to. We have a whole setup for that. So then he gets the idea that he can immediately plead insanity.
And I think that's the whole theme of the movie. Mm-hmm. But it's so like.
There's some things that are brushed away that I think are more interesting than what's put to the screen. Yeah. You know? And I particularly think giving him a reason is one thing, and then we see it now through today's lens, but at the beginning of the film, he's flirting with the two girls at the theater as they're leaving. One of the girls, the smart one, is like, this guy seems off. She seems like I can't trust him. Gross. The other girl's actually interested in him. So really, if he's involuntarily celibate, what's stopping him from taking that girl on a date and maybe getting some fun time? Like, because it seems like the other girl's really interested in him, where she's like, well, he's cute. He's going to buy us a drink. Whatever. He's got a shot there. So there's something that, like, is missing in that disconnects between, like, why is he voluntarily celibate? Why doesn't he have a good dating life? Because it seems pretty suave with some people.
My one harsh criticism to this is go a little more grindier. I think it's a little more polished. And if you want to do this, go a little more grindhouse. You probably get a better audience, but then Bronson probably wouldn't be interested in doing it. I think you had to do, if you pull in two different dynamics, you're going to get kind of this thing. Yeah. This should have been some kind of grindhouse thing where the killer's naked. Well, show everything.
Show everything, man.
Right.
You get a lot of, my wife was watching a movie with me where she was like.
Get a cheaper camera and people will appreciate the low budget of the thing.
My wife was watching the movie with me, and she was like, this is totally something that would happen in the 80s. Is the killer is nude, but yet we see more naked women than we do men. Yeah. And I was like, that is an odd thing to do, and they should have gone further. In fact, Bronson put the X on the final fight that the two were going to have. They were actually going to wrestle around, but he's like, I'm not wrestling a naked man. He's not even really bought into the idea.
But I always thought for me the title of the movie was the event at the end happened at 10 to midnight. But they don't tell you that.
Yeah, and it seemed like the only explanation I was able to find was that it had to do with the time frame and the immediacy of, like, getting to find this killer, because
like
every moment you wait,
kind of a thing,
kind of like what Al Pacino's film 88 Minutes did, where it's like they made the time frame for you of like, this is about a speed situation you have to fix or it's going to get worse. Yeah. But it doesn't really ever reach that for me, and I felt like the gore factor. This is an 80s film. It's a slasher film in some ways. There's so little gore to the film, so we've got this extreme nudity, but then they kind of do the psycho where, like, you don't see the stabbing happen, but you see the blood. And so you don't actually get a sense of the the grindiness of it, the grindhouse quality that you're missing. So
yeah. If you're a big fan of Charles Bronson's films, of course, this is required viewing. It's one of, of course, one of his things that you enjoy. If you enjoy J. Lee Thompson and Charles Bronson, they would go on to do Murphy's Law in 1986. It's actually a far more celebrated movie. It's got a lot more comedy in it than this one does. And in that movie, Charles Bronson gets framed for the murder of his ex-wife, and he has to go on a campaign to prove himself innocent, of course.
Which would have made for a great Death Wish sequel.
Would have been a great Death Wish sequel. They also did Messenger of Death, which was actually not a bad. I mean, he's supposed to be a retired journalist. If you believe Charles Bronson would be a journalist who's investigating a cold
They could
case.
use the shot from the opening of this film.
Yeah.
He could be typing on his typewriter. But you know what's funny about Messenger of Death is it also has Gene Davis as a killer in the film with J. Lee Thompson and Charles Bronson. So again, it's kind of like, let's just make the movie again.
Let's make the movie again. So yeah, you have to be in the camp of enjoying Charles Bronson films already.
Yeah.
To capture what you would like about this movie.
And for my part, I knew what I was getting into watching a movie with him. And so his scenes I enjoyed because he's doing exactly what I expected him to do. He's not winning an Academy Award for this, but he's doing exactly what I expected his performance to do. And so in that way, I enjoyed watching him do his thing. Yeah. But there's a mess of other ideas around him that unfortunately make for a difficult time. And I was extremely surprised that this film being made in the 80s, that they weren't thinking about the video television market as much, because this movie would have had to have been very difficult to get on television. It's one of the reasons I probably hadn't seen the film.
No, it got a lot of steam through rental.
Yeah.
This was not a theater. It bombed a theater, but through the rental system. And I think that's what happened a lot. Like, hey, this Bronson movie, you never heard about it. Yeah.
But I found out that they shot scenes without the nudity so that they could get it onto TV, and it became one of the most expensive TV acquisitions of all time. Of course, the film sold TV rights for $2.5 million, which at the time is a lot of money to get for television rights to a movie. So I'm surprised it even made it to TV, because so much of the film revolves around the nudity that I'm surprised they even had a cut they could use. But
it's a small little window movie. This movie got made because Charles Bronson had the rights to the film The Evil That Men Do. And prior to Cannon making that movie with Charles Bronson, they wanted to do this one first.
Yeah, it sounded like the Golan and Globus and Cannon Films were not interested in making that film. And so they said, we'll finance your next movie, but it can't be that one. I don't know what it was about that specific one, but then again, Cannon was a wild house during that time period, and they were making movies they shouldn't make, and they weren't making movies they should. So
it's a bizarre documentary if you follow the history of
Electric
Cannon
Boogaloo?
Film. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a wild documentary. Whew.
Yeah. So, have you seen 10 to Midnight?
Yeah, I'm sure you remember it if you have. It's
you're a
certainly not a
Bronson fan,
forgettable film by any stretch of the imagination. It's not one that I loved, but there's a couple things in there. If you're a fan of Bronson, I think you'll get a couple of good kicks out of it.
If you're a Bronson fan, you enjoy the little marks and things that he
But this
does.
definitely, for me, is not an entry-level Bronson film.
No.
Like, I think you got to go maybe like Original Death Wish or something where it's like the really notable Bronson
He needed to do what like Arnold and all of them do. For every movie he had to do like with his fingers he did in Death Wish.
The problem was he was 60 when all those guys were 30. You know, he was already kind of behind the times of it. But yeah, let us know your thoughts down below.
Exactly.
And maybe give me your favorite Charles Bronson film, maybe your favorite collaboration with the director, but definitely your favorite Bronson film, because he's made a lot of movies, but he's really known for like one.
Okay. All right. If you didn't know, and I think Kyle should know, Bronson did this very action-oriented Casablanca ripoff called Cabo Blanco.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I never watched it.
Oh my
I'm probably
God.
in the luck on that one.
Yeah, but it's just it's all like the aesthetics of Casablanca in color, but it's like 80s, just trash it. Yeah.
Well, if you'd like to see us cover Casablanca on the show, join the
Cabo
Patreon,
Blanco, right,
or
yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Join the Patreon down below and tell us if that's what we should cover in a future episode.
It's a
You're probably
dollar
not gonna
bin
get me.
movie for sure.
And thank you guys for joining us. We do really appreciate our viewers in the show, and especially those of you who comment down below. We love engaging with the audience that we have. We have such a terrific audience. So thank you for joining us, and you can find all my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
And you can find on my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts.